Our gospel this morning is John chapter 9, verses 1 through 41, and we've been seeing and viewing our gospel, and we will this morning.
As Jesus was walking along, he saw a man who had been born blind.
Teacher, whose sin caused him to be born blind? Was it his own or his parents' sin?
His blindness has nothing to do with his sins or his parents' sins. He is blind so that God's power might be seen at work in him. As long as it is day, we must keep on doing the work of him who sent me. Night is coming, when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light for the world.
After he said this, Jesus spat on the ground and made some mud with the spittle. He rubbed the mud on the man's eyes.
Go and wash your face in the pool of Siloam.
This name means sent. So the man went, washed his face, and came back, seeing. His neighbors then, and the people who had seen him begging before this, asked, "Isn't this the man who used to sit and beg?"
He's the one. No, he isn't. He just looks like him. I am the man. How is it that you can now see?
The man called Jesus made some mud, rubbed it on my eyes, and told me to go to Siloam and wash my face. So I went, and as soon as I washed, I could see.
Where is he?
I don't know.
Then they took to the Pharisees the man who had been blind. The day that Jesus made the mud and cured him of his blindness was a Sabbath. The Pharisees then asked the man again how he had received his sight.
He put some mud on my eyes. I washed my face, and now I can see.
The man who did this cannot be from God, for he does not obey the Sabbath law. How could a man who is a sinner perform such miracles as these?
And there was division among them.
You say he cured you of your blindness. Well, what do you say about him?
He is a prophet.
The Jewish authorities, however, were not willing to believe that he had been blind and could now see until they called his parents.
Is this your son? You say that he was born blind. How is it then that he can now see?
We know that he is our son, and we know that he was born blind. But we don't know how it is that he is now able to see, nor do we know who cured him of his blindness.
Ask him. He is old enough and he can answer for himself.
His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jewish authorities, who had already agreed that anyone who said he believed that Jesus was the Messiah would be expelled from the synagogue. That is why his parents said, "He is old enough, ask him." A second time, they called back the man who had been born blind.
Promise before God that you will tell the truth. We know that this man who cured you is a sinner.
I do not know if he is a sinner or not. One thing I do know. I was blind. And now I see.
What did he do to you? How did he cure you of your blindness?
I have already told you and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Maybe you too would like to be his disciples.
They insulted him and said,
You are that fellow's disciple. But we are Moses' disciples. We know that God spoke to Moses. As for that fellow, however, we do not even know where he comes from.
What a strange thing that is. You do not know where he comes from, but he cured me of my blindness. We know that God does not listen to sinners. He does listen to people who respect him and do what he wants them to do. Since the beginning of the world, nobody has ever heard of anyone giving sight to a person born blind. Unless this man came from God, he would not be able to do a thing.
You were born and brought up in sin! And you are trying to teach us.
and they expelled him from the synagogue. When Jesus heard what had happened, he found the man.
Do you believe in the Son of Man?
Tell me who he is, sir, so that I can believe in him.
You have already seen him. And he is the one who is talking with you now.
I believe, Lord.
And he knelt down before Jesus.
I came to this world to judge, so that the blind should see, and those who see should become blind.
Some Pharisees who were there with him heard him say this and asked him,
Surely you don't mean that we are blind too?
If you were blind, then you would not be guilty. But since you claim that you can see, this means that you are still guilty.
Pastor Steve's been sharing with us about the Gospel of John. And one of the things that he shared with us was that John, as he writes his gospel, focuses on the fact that Jesus is the light. This gospel is about the light. It's about the lights coming into the world. It's about the lights coming to this blind man, healing of his physical blindness, but it's also about another kind of blindness as well, a blindness that we find in the Pharisees and that sometimes can even dim our vision as well. In John's introduction to his gospel, in John chapter 1, John says this. He says, all things came into being through the Word, through Jesus. And without him, not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life, and that life was the light of all people. And then John says this, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. Over the last chapters that have been happening since last week, Pastor Steve talked about John chapter 4. He talked about the Samaritan woman who was at the well, and Jesus came to her and brought her light. In the 5, 6, 7, 8, and the 4 chapters since then, The opposition to Jesus has been growing, and the darkness has been pushing back against the light that Jesus is bringing into the world. In chapters 5 through 8, Jesus healed a man who had been paralyzed for 38 years. He fed 5,000 hungry people. He walked on water and showed his mastery over the elements, over nature. He rescued a woman who was being stoned for adultery, and he forgave her. He had been bringing light and healing and forgiveness and peace and love and joy into so many lives. But the darkness couldn't stand it. The opposition pushed back. The religious leaders of Jesus' day objected. Jesus was doing this stuff on the Sabbath. He was claiming that he was God and that he and the Father were one. He was claiming that his authority and that his teaching were greater than theirs. Some of them were starting to make plans to arrest him and get rid of him. At the end of chapter 8, Jesus had claimed, even before Abraham, 1,800 years ago, I am. And the religious authorities took up stones then in order to stone him to death. But we're told that Jesus hid and escaped from them and from the temple. Which brings us then to John chapter 9 this morning, and the man born blind. The point of this chapter is that the darkness will not win. The darkness that is growing in the Gospel of John, the darkness that is growing in the opposition to Jesus, it's not going to win. It can push back. But Jesus has come to bring light to those who are in the darkness. He's come to open the eyes of the blind so that they can see. And the darkness, the opposition, will not be able to stop him. In John chapter 9, as we just saw, there was this man who had been in the dark. He had been physically blind for all of his life. And it may have even been darker for him because in those days, people, even Jesus' disciples, assumed that such a terrible thing as being blind from birth must have been the result of some terrible, terrible sin. But no, Jesus says, he was not born blind because of some sin. Jesus doesn't tell us why he was born blind. He just goes on to say that God's works will be revealed in him. We must work the works of God, who sent me, Jesus says, while it is day, while we can. For as long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. And with that, he spits on the ground, made mud with the saliva, put the mud on the man's eyes. Can we all say, ew? Sent him to the pool of Siloam in Jerusalem to wash, and the man was healed. Physically, he was healed. But there's another kind of darkness, another kind of blindness. There's a spiritual blindness where you just cannot see God. It was the blindness that afflicted the Pharisees. They saw the man born blind. They saw him healed, but they could not see God who had done it. They just saw their rules. Jesus had healed this man on the Sabbath, so of course he can't be God. And they looked at the blind man with their assumptions and with their prejudices about blind people, and they saw only that he was a sinner, and certainly God wouldn't heal or help or care about sinners. They said to this blind man who had been healed, "You were born entirely in sins. Are you trying to teach us?" And they drove him out of the synagogue. It's so sad. It really is so sad. It's kind of like the game we used to play when we were kids. Mama, I can't see. Baby, what's the matter? My eyes are closed. Thankfully, God's eyes were not closed. His eyes were not closed to those who are blind or who are blind. His eyes are not closed to those who are physically suffering, nor are his eyes closed to those who are spiritually blind either. When Jesus hears that the Pharisees had driven out the man, he went looking for him. He didn't wait for the guy to look and try to find Jesus. Jesus went looking for him. He cared about him. He cared about completing the healing and the light that he had started in him when he healed his physical blindness. Jesus went looking for him, and he found him. And Jesus asked him then, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" "Who is he, sir, so that I can believe in him?" "You have seen him," Jesus said. "The one speaking to you, me, I am." And with that, the man's spiritual eyes were opened. His healing was complete. He could see now what the Pharisees refused to see. He saw God. He saw his love. He saw God's light in Jesus, and he worshiped him. This chapter raises the question for us: how well do we see? All around us in the world, in the creation, all around us in our lives, God is doing amazing things. God has given us a beautiful world. God has answered our prayers, given us food, clothes, forgiven us of our sins, loved us and accepted us without limits, without any strings attached. God has given us Jesus, and Jesus has given us his life so that we might have light, so that we might have life. And as we will hear next week, so that we might have life to the full and overflowing. "I came into the world," Jesus said, "so that those who do not see may see." He came so that we might see and live in that light, so that we might see God. Now, for the blind man, that light came on gradually. It came on in stages. First, there was the physical healing. And then when he looked at Jesus, he looked and saw and believed that Jesus was a prophet. And then finally, when Jesus came to him and shined his lights most brightly into his heart, he was able to see, no, he's more than just a prophet. He is the Son of Man, and he bowed down to worship him. I suspect that for most of us, the light comes on in kind of the same kind of way. Not suddenly, all at once, like this great big huge spotlight that shines into our lives and into our hearts. But for most of us, I think probably the light comes on in our lives more like a dimmer switch being turned up gradually. Each day or each week or each year, seeing something new, seeing something clearer. At least that's the way it's been for me in my life. Coming here and being at Joy has helped me to see God better and to know him a little bit better, as I've seen God in all of you, in your welcome, in your acceptance of Connie and me and of our family, in your love for children, in your love for one another, in your concern for this community and for the world. The light has gotten brighter for me here, and I've come to know Jesus better and better. Now, Lent starts on Wednesday, and it gives us all a chance to come to see Jesus and to experience his love a little bit more clearly. Lent is I always look forward to Lent. It's I've been accused of being a downer, a bummer kind of guy, because I love those quiet and reflective times. But it gives us a chance for 6 weeks, to look a little bit closer and to see a little bit more clearly God and God's love for us. This Lent here at Joy, there's a service each week during Lent at 6:30. Am I right? 6:30. And great time to come and reflect on what it means for the light, Jesus Christ, to come into our lives and into the world. There's a supper as well, 5:15 to 6:30 still. Yeah. It's a great time to be together. Lent is also a great time to take a little time each day alone with God, to read the scriptures, to look a little more closely into our lives and all around us, to see God and experience a little bit more of the gracious one and of his love for us. Please join us then as we sing about this grace as it comes and shines in our lives. Amazing grace.